Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. Tony Griffin is a GAA All Star for hurling who in 2006 took a bit of a sidestep away from the sport to cycle 7,000 kilometres across Canada, raising over €1 million for cancer care and research. In 2010 he published his memoir Screaming at the Sky, and the latest edition of his Teenager's Book of Life is out in October. Tony, you're very welcome.
Great.
First of all, thank you so much for coming in. I suppose starting with Screaming at the Sky, that in pre-planning was supposed to be one thing,
yes,
but then things happened and actually the book became something else.
Yeah, like it's always very fancy when you say you've a memoir. I was like 28 when I got a memoir, but I had been keeping kind of meticulous enough diaries, or you'd call it journaling now, but back then it was trying to make sense of playing at this kind of high level, but also feeling beset by fears and nerves, and not all the time, but enough to take some of the joy out of playing at that high level. You know, when people go to watch people playing Croke Park or the Aviva, it's such an entertaining thing for them, but for the player in the middle, it can very often be, in the days coming up to it, can be a very difficult
stressful
experience. Yeah. And so I kept diaries about when I played well, what my mind was like, and I said it to a friend of mine, and he was a writer, and he said, we should really write a book about that. And my father had died not long before that, and then when he read my diaries, I gave them to him, and I said to him, just one thing, don't think I'm mad, no one's read these. And he read them, he said, this isn't about hurling, this is about you and your father, and this is about grief, and this is about love. It's way more than hurling. It's actually, hurling isn't what this is about at all. And that really got me thinking. And then we worked together for the next few years and wrote Screaming at the Sky, and the response to it was just, I didn't expect the response to it. You know, the letters from players I'd played against talking about their own inner struggles, from mothers of guys who'd maybe taken their own lives saying, I wish I'd understood more about what my son or my husband was like and what was going on in their head. And amazing, people still read the book, I don't know, 10, 12 years later.
Because I suppose, talking about your dad as well, Jerome, a lot of time with sports people and successful sports people, it's been passed on from beforehand. Yeah. What was the impact, and what sort of role did your dad play in your success?
It's interesting, Venetia, because I never really realised the role my father probably had was, like, there were 7 of us in my family, and my mum's Scottish, and they'd moved back from Scotland to a rural part of Clare called Ballyea when they, with 5 kids, and they went from a fairly nice life in Scotland in the middle of a large town / small city, I suppose, to rural. And where we landed was hurling was kind of the thing, so that's what kids did in the evenings or weekends, and it was a brilliant upbringing because we'd all belt off on our bikes up to the local pitch, and that's where you met everyone. For a lot of us, that's where we kissed our first girl. That was where a lot of stuff happened. And I just suppose, looking back, I probably was blessed to find the sport because it gave me a sense of value. When I was off the field, I didn't really feel in any way valuable. I was probably fighting for a position in a house full of people. But when I got on the field, I felt different. I felt like I was the wind, that I could do anything. And that didn't mean I was the best at it, but it meant I found great joy in it. So my father's way of supporting was just, I think, being there. Like, lately, my mother was clearing out things that she had taken from when my father died, from his cupboards and things, beside his bed. And one of the things that were there was a slitter or a ball that when I made my debut for Clare, so I was like 18 going on 19, this ball had gone over the post into the next field down in Kerry somewhere, and he'd gone and got it. He had written the score line, the date, the game, and he had it in his bedside locker all those years. So when he died, my mother obviously realised I'd appreciate it, and I was showing it to my son, and I was like, that was his way. It was quiet. It was
pride.
Support, and probably just, if you needed anything middle of the night, you need to go somewhere, let's go.
How did that make you feel when you found that he kept that and he'd written the date? Like, it's sort of that quiet, sort of unspoken.
Well, like I've kids now. I have 5-year-old and 10-year-old, and 10-year-old's Jerome, and I'd probably just, it was like, it's funny things, I'd seen it, like my mother had given it to me, but for some reason I ended up back in her house, and my sister gave it to me around 2-3 weeks ago, and it's those little nods I find that are like, it was the same when I was doing the cycle. There was times I really felt his presence very, very closely, and on 1 or 2 times in the prairies, I actually turned around thinking there was someone cycling up behind me, even though I was in the complete wilderness. Finding it just made me realise probably how close he is. And, you know, it's years on. But also the role that dads play in boys' lives, it's so significant. And for me, it wasn't that he said a lot. It was just that a quiet support, that I knew he was there and he had my back. And it's and I was fortunate to have it. Not every boy or not every girl has that. You know, they very often lose a dad. But when you've got one that just wants to do everything they can for you, it's a great thing.
Obviously, the sport you played is a hugely, like, it's a tough sport. It's competitive. You
end up with fingers in a nose like this.
You need a really, really tough mental mindset, if that makes sense. When your dad died then, and this comes out in the book, how was that? Was that a shock that you actually were struggling with your grief? Because when you go on a pitch, you've got this like certain ability to be mentally strong.
Yeah, it's like the gift is often the curse. And one of the things about hurling was I wouldn't have considered myself, when I looked at the other guys, I wouldn't have considered myself mentally strong. But it was only years later, working with other players and other athletes from other sports and people in general for 20 years, you realise we were all feeling the same way, just like as in nerves or anxiety coming up to games or fear of letting people down, but you didn't talk about it. And in a way, the coaches I had, they were very dominating. Like, if they'd almost try and break you to see did you have what it took, because they needed to know. So we grew up that way. That's a gift in a way. It allows you to perform in those environments. But I suppose the downside is when Daddy died, I actually didn't know what to do with the feelings I had. I couldn't even name them. And I'd never really heard the word grief. I just thought, okay, I just need to move on here. And I do remember early games after he died, looking around and actually thinking I'd seen him in the crowd and thinking, am I losing my mind here? And that whole sense of not knowing how to talk about it. My sisters and my mother probably would have been much better able to talk about it, but I didn't talk about it. My brothers and I didn't talk about it. My friends didn't talk about it. So you just don't talk about it. And then what do you do with all those feelings? And I am definitely a heart in the sleeve type of person. So I found it, the best way was just try not to think about it. Try to block it out. Try to pretend it's not there. But I felt such a sense of... I felt all the feelings that go with grief. You know, I was angry. Why did it happen to him? 65, 66 years of age. You know, why did he have to work with asbestos? Why did he have to have the life he had? So unfair. To sadness, to, you know, regret. You know, my brothers and sisters were there in his final minutes. I hadn't made it back from university in Canada, and so much guilt over that and regret.
How did that actually... Because I think that's a sort of an interesting dynamic that people don't think about when somebody dies, is the people that were there with the person and the people that weren't because they didn't make it or they just happened to be out or whatever. And that can sometimes cause a weird dynamic within the family. Did you find that?
Well, we're very, very, very fortunate. 7 of us, and we're very close. Like, we're not in each other's ear, but my God, I could ring, and he's 6, and I know they'd show up at my doorstep. They're just wonderful siblings, and I think that's my mother and father, the way their characters were probably rubbing off on us. But I never really thought about that as such, but I do remember some of the thoughts that would come to me in the weeks afterwards when I went back to university and back to do exams and finish things off was, what was it like at the end? Did he look around the room and say, where's Anthony? You know, things like that. And again, just stuff them down as far as they can go, you know, so they don't interrupt your day and not think about it. But then when I was back in Halifax and back in my day-to-day life of being a college student, I used to think to myself, did I let him down? Like, he never let me down, did I? Should I have been there? You know, I could have come back. Why didn't I? Was I too selfish to try and finish out my exams? But
there's also that lack of closure because you didn't actually
Exactly.
physically say goodbye when he was still there.
Exactly.
Was that an extra layer?
Yeah, and around a month or 6 weeks before he did die, he had pneumonia, and I was with him in the hospital in Galway, and I was trying to get him in through casualty and through the A&E, and like the poor man was just very weak, and we were sitting 8, 9, 10 hours. You know, I was shivering, and you know, the world is small. A guy I used to play hurling with in university in Galway had become a nurse, and he passed. He said, "Tony, how are you?" And I was explaining about my dad, and he said, the old Irish way, let me take care of you, you know. And we got this tiny little trolley room almost, and a friend of mine who had lost his dad said, make sure you tell him before he dies that you love him. And I said, I don't need to tell him, he knows. Obviously just shitting myself that I'd have to actually say it and the world was going to end. And I was trying all day saying, how am I going to say it to him? And I said to him, you know, I couldn't have got through the last 23, 24 years without you. And he said to me, I couldn't have got through today without you.
Wow. What did you find in yourself afterwards? I mean, again, what you did on the field requires a lot of self-confidence and but a lot of people, when they lose somebody, they lose that self-confidence and they lose their self-esteem and their sense of self. Did you find that? Did you find it was sort of, you lost that sort of belief in your ability?
I think in some ways I had the opposite experience, like where in 2005 when Dad passed, it was close to Christmas, I decided then not to go back to Halifax and play hurling or go back to university and defer it for a year, and I lived back at home, and we had a very, very small farm, and I probably was the least likely of all 7 to be involved in the day-to-day animal husbandry of a few cattle or whatever, but that's what I was doing most days, feeding a few cattle, going up. And I remember one day having this sense of, God, I'm wearing Daddy's jacket and I'm using the fork he used, and he did this a few weeks ago or a few months ago before he got ill. And that sense of, so I think I became a bit obsessed with training that year, because I was training full time. No one had ever done it in the GAA world, and so there was a lot of, not controversy, but definitely opinion pieces written about, is this guy going to bring the game professional? This is going against the ethos. So I had a sense I have to prove that it wasn't a wasted experiment playing full time. And so I just started training like a crazy man. In hindsight, you know, I'd train in the morning, I'd sleep in the afternoon, train at night, and then some days we'd train in Ennis, which is like maybe 7-8 kilometres away, and I'd run from home there, do the training session, run back. You know, I was
sort of obsessed,
almost like just trying to keep moving, not to think about it, but also driven by this sense of anger. I'm going to do something, and the only thing I could do with this was pour it into the game. But ironically, I started playing much better then, because, you know, I just didn't fear. You know, I was blocking out every thought. So blocking out the thoughts that I had of nerves and worry were easy, because I was blocking out so much else. Yeah. And that's the year I won the All Star, ironically.
Yeah. And what was the catalyst then for when it did all come out?
Well, after the All Star year, which was 2006, I had seen a documentary with this guy called Terry Fox, and Terry Fox is a hero in Canada because he tried to run across Canada with a leg and a half. He had an amputated leg, and he did a marathon a day for like 20 odd days before the cancer spread. And he wanted to show the world that even with cancer, he was a young guy, that you can do incredible things. And I said to myself, what are you going to do? And this idea came to cycle across Canada, and I said it to a few people, my roommates. They laughed. They said, "Do you not realise Ireland is like would fit into Nova Scotia, and Canada's the second largest landmass?" But the idea took flight, and it caught on fire, and all of a sudden people like Lance Armstrong were offering me bikes, and it just took on a life of its own. And the whole cycle was a journey of meeting cancer patients, meeting the mothers of like who had lost their children. So repeatedly, every second day, I was meeting someone who was either dying or had lost someone. And all the time, I was like this hero doing this heroic thing. And I wasn't. It was about my father, but I wasn't almost allowed to feel the grief because I was doing it for everyone else. At least that's what I told myself.
Yeah.
And so by the end, it had grown into a massive thing. We cycled across Ireland. I met my now wife on the last few kilometres into Ennis. There were 7,000 people at the finish line. We were raising money. This is before TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. We were raising money. Riverdance came and danced at a dinner for us. So, but when all that went home, and everyone went home, and the 200 volunteers went home, I was still carrying the grief and didn't realise it. So the wheels just kind of came off my life, really. I stopped wanting to go to university, and then couldn't sit in a class when I did. Didn't want to leave the house. Didn't want to leave my room. Would stay in the room for days. It was just so unlike me. And then one night I went out for a walk to clear my head, and it was lashing rain in Halifax, and I couldn't remember my way home. I just walked for hours trying to find my way home, and didn't say anything to anyone. Went to see this school doctor, and the doctor said, "I think you have depression. You should go on medication." I just got up and walked out. Of course, like, nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. Just can't find my way home. And like, I was like the guy who had Jason in his golden fleece. I needed to bring it. And then I came home. I just escalated to one night where I just drove around, and I just didn't want to be here. And that was like, I was living these two lives. I was still coming back and playing in front of 40, 50,000 people, and then maybe not sleeping for 3 or 4 nights. And the biggest fear was I thought I was losing my mind. I said, I'm never going to be me again. And then one night I just made a call and told someone I needed some help, and that was a turning point of sorts. And it was only then I started to understand the grief.
Wow. Then you met Jim Steins.
Well, I didn't actually meet him, but
the contact happened with Jim Steins, who was involved with Sarah, or Sarah came about at that time, because obviously at the time I think Ireland was the 4th highest rate of youth suicide. Why was that so high at the time?
It was around the time of the global financial crisis, and it was probably a sign of that and many other things going on at the time. It was telling us a lot about where we were. This is 2011, around our knowledge and relationship with our mental and emotional health and our inner worlds. I had just come through 2 years of kind of putting myself back together myself. I was living in Dublin. I met Ciara obviously at the end of the cycle, and I had heard from a lot, when Scream at the Sky came out, I heard from a lot of players who said, look, I have an addiction to this, or I'm suicidal. And they were, some of them, nationally known players that people would watch on TV and think they were bulletproof, but because of Screaming at the Sky, they were reaching out to me and writing to me or contacting me. And so we looked at doing something we were so ahead of our time when I look back at it. It was for men, to promote its masculinity is broad, and to open that up, especially for guys that were struggling. And we were all on to do it with the GPA, the Gaelic Players Association, and the GFC hit, and the HSC said there's no funding for that. And I was thinking, well, that's done so. And then I saw a documentary about Jim Steins, and in the documentary, he was an Irish guy, went to Australia, played Aussie rules, but also set up an organisation called REACH, which is for teenagers. and he collaborated with a method actor, and they basically helped teenagers access the raw emotions they were feeling, but there was nowhere they felt able to express them. And in this documentary, Jim is dying from cancer. He's only my age. Well, he's 45, a year older than me, and his head is covered in the scars of brain surgery. And he's in the middle of a room, and all this room is packed with people in their teens and 20s, and one by one they step out from the crowd and they tell Jim the impact he'd had on their lives. Wow. And he's stoic for most of the conversation, and then he just breaks down and weeps like a child because he knows he's dying, and this is the impact he's had. And that group had helped him access this sense of acceptance with the grief of his pending death.
His living grief.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember saying to my wife, what did he do for these guys? Like, because I didn't know anything really about him, found out, and then went down to Melbourne not long afterwards to study what Reach had done. And it was so visionary what they were doing with teenagers. They were allowing teenagers kind of take control of their lives and understand who they are and where they've come from and where they'd like to go. And so two of us just called it SOAR, and brought it back to Ireland and adapted it and started going into schools. And I was able to relate to these teenagers because they'd tell me about maybe periods of cutting themselves, or, how they'd lost a parent, very often a grandparent. They'd bawl their eyes out.
Yeah, because it's actually, I was having that conversation over the weekend with some of the people don't give enough, I suppose, thought to how grandkids feel when they lose a grandparent, because nowadays they see so much more of their grandparents if the parents are working or they spend so much time with them, that we sort of go, so-and-so's granny died, but we don't actually go, like, for them it's huge.
It is. And like, teenagers are masters of a judgment radar, so they'll know how much emotion you're able for, and they'll show you just what they think you're able for. They won't let you see any more than what they feel you are willing before you'll start judging them. So, like, their worst fear is judgment in a way. So, like, I remember this one guy in particular, a big rugby player in a rugby school, broke down. He said, look, I'd go into my granny and she'd have soup ready for me and a sandwich, and she'd ask me did I like any girls, and I'd tell her about the girls I liked, and I'd tell her about teachers I didn't like and how Mam was annoying me, and by the end of it she'd just give me a hug and I'd feel like it's all okay again. And that's an example of how important grandparents are, especially the ones that are with the teenager, as you said. And so we just travelled the country running these workshops starting in 2012, and it just took off like a runaway train. Because
there wasn't really anything before. I mean, we've Jigsaw now and a few others. I mean, obviously there's a lot more that needs to be done, but this was quite, as you said, ahead of its time.
Yeah, like I remember in a girls' school, a girl standing up and saying, sometimes I self-harm because of the anxiety about school, and another girl stood up, and then another girl, and the teacher said to us, we can't talk about this. And they all rounded on her and said, well, where do we talk about it? And our facilitators were trained to deal with this. So, it was 8, 9, 10 years of that, and just understanding that there's so many of the similar issues going on for young people. It's just the postcode changes.
Yeah. The Teenager's Book of Life. Now, this is sort of about to be relaunched. You pulled all the voices from who you've listened to during Sarah. What were the most surprising things and what were the bits, I suppose, that you've been able to use?
I think the most surprising thing for me was what teenagers are able for in terms of how they want to speak about certain things, how they want to be spoken about certain things, the level of honesty they want or would like, and how we forget that we ourselves as teenagers wanted the same thing. And so I won't say talk down to them, but we misinterpret what level they'd like to go to. And so the book was written, and some schools have said to me, we don't use it because there's bad language in it and things like that. But teenagers read it, or they hear it, they listen to it sometimes because it's on Spotify, and they contact me saying, that's the first time I feel someone talk directly to me, that they weren't talking at me.
Wow.
Yeah. And how that book came about was really bizarre because Jesse, our baby, was real colicky, and we used to, middle of the pandemic, we'd drive him around late at night, way outside our zone, to try and get him to sleep, just bump him up the Wicklow Mountains, then back. And one evening I was driving back, and someone had asked me for a quote for teenagers because they were saying, you know, that it's a difficult time to be at home in your room. And the only one I could think of, and it was like it came up on the windscreen, was the most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. All the others are secondary. And I was like, geez, that sounds half original. That might do.
Yeah.
And then I went home that night, and as I was feeding Jessie, I started writing the Who Am I chapter. And I started thinking of all these teenagers from Ballyhonus to Ballyfermot to all over the country, and these different schools and different environments, and the things they'd said that they wished adults understood about what it was like to be them.
Yeah.
And in 6 weeks, the book was done.
Because it's bizarre when you say it like that, how quickly we forget.
Yeah.
But it's only when you sit back and think about it. Because in the moment, you're just going,
yeah,
why can't you do that? Or,
I know.
you know, and
Yeah.
then you go, okay, I remember having,
Yeah.
you know, so it's sort of,
Yeah.
it's really a sort of take a breath, step away, and then go back to it, really,
and
isn't it?
many of our lives are so busy that takes time and mental load to stand in and be in that life. But if you recall, like, many of us fell in love in that stage, and it was like we'd do anything for that person. You know, we felt, that was when I first said, I want to play for Clare, I want to play in Croke Park, I want that. And you know how they say, the wiser you get, the more you know what can go wrong. And so we become fearful as we get older, and we've more to risk. We think we do, and we do. We've people that we care for. But when you're in that age, you're not a child anymore, you're not an adult yet. It's just, there's so much, it's just seeped in potential. It's dripping with potential. So many great discoveries come at that age. You know, great bands, great poems, great ideas. And that's why I think if we leave it to chance, it's not just that they might struggle in that age group. It might be that their whole life could be set up in that age group, but we don't take them seriously enough to see that.
Yeah.
And we felt that very often.
Or-
Adults look down on us.
Yeah.
They just think I'm a teenager.
Yeah. This new edition has a chapter called Saying Goodbye, which you wrote with your sister,
Yeah.
Angela.
I'm so proud of that. Yeah.
She actually, another person helped with that chapter as well.
Yes.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, her friend.
Her friend Justine, who didn't
Yeah.
sadly see
Yeah.
it come to
Yeah. It's
fruition.
another...
No, that's
Jesus.
sorry.
People who know me won't be that shocked. My brothers are shaking their head going, oh, Jesus, there he goes again. No, I'm okay with this. I say to my son all the time, man that can't cry, he's not really a man. But one of the things the reasons why I think that's poignant is because from day one, we've self-published our Teenager's Book of Life, and every time there's a financial, there's a level of bravery to keep going back and publishing the book. And the reason I do it is because I know people benefit from it. I know some schools use it, and I know parents read it to their kids at night. And I always felt that there was parts that weren't complete in it. But every time we decide to republish it, it's like, oh my God, I have to go and generate the funds to self-publish this again. But the grief chapter kept coming back to me, because when I looked at my own struggles, you know, it was underpinned by having no knowledge of grief, no understanding of it, didn't even understand what it was. Yet, as we spoke about, very often in school workshops, the thing that really hurt teenagers the most was that sense of loss, and no one would talk to them about it. And so I was in a cafe in Neenah in County Tipperary, and this guy came up to me, and he was obviously he managed the place, maybe mid-20s, and he said, "You don't remember me?" And I said, "No, sorry." He said, "You came to my school when I was in transition year. Our friend had just died of cancer. No one would talk to us about it. And you came in and you changed the whole dynamic, because all you said is, let's remember him. Let's tell stories about him." And we all told our story of the impact he'd had in our life. And he said, for the rest of our school year, we were so close and we were so tight. And that's when I decided, I'm going to have to write something about grief. And when I contacted Angela, and just said, I just have the person, Justine would help us. And so Justine helped, and maybe I should give some context. So my sister Angela was the lead psychologist at Southampton Children's Hospital for 20 years, built the department, grew it, and Justine was one of her team. And so when we decided to write this chapter, Justine helped us. And then during it, Justine got cancer and died. And I just think it's such a poignant, that her gift to the world was what she
because
was doing.
It is an amazing chapter to read, especially if you're in that position and you sort of go, oh, and I found myself, I kept going back over it again and just picking up, little bits that make perfect sense,
right,
but in some ways make it easier as well for kids to dip into, and it makes it sort of accessible rather than having adults talk to them.
That's it.
About it all the time.
The illustrator, Kathy Hogan, did an amazing job just bringing some of Justine and Angela's concepts together. And my role then was to adapt it so that it would be digestible by a teenager. And so my wife's nephew, Michael, he's our chief editor. He's 17. And he edited the whole chapter for me,
so
along with my two nieces.
For
I said, does this bore you? And he said,
yeah,
there's some parts that do. All that medical stuff, take that out or rewrite it. And my two nieces, Isabel and Alva, did the same. So that chapter is like a Rubik's Cube. We've come at it from the professional, we've come at it from the teenager.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I became emotional there is because it's a lovely thing to have written it with Angela, given that where I think my whole journey began with teenagers was me going through my own grief. Mm-hmm. And here we write a grief chapter together that I just hope and I believe it will be of value to families. It
is. You break it down into, obviously, the stages of grief, and they sort of differ depending where you read them sometimes.
Yeah.
And you have denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance, and sort of the other four, the first two and the last two, sort of are there in a lot of them. But what do you mean by bargaining?
Well, that's like, if I wish it hadn't. If I only had one more day, I'd tell him how I felt.
The shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's so funny. Like, I don't know if you ever watch Young Sheldon. My son loves it. But there's an episode, I think it's the second last episode in the whole series, where the dad is leaving to go to work, and he says to young Sheldon, do you want a lift? And the dad says this. Sheldon says no, and the dad dies of a heart attack that day. And the rest of the episode is Sheldon replaying all the possible endings to that question before the door closes. Yeah, Dad, I'd love a lift with you, and all the other versions. And the whole episode is him bargaining, trying to make it end differently. And you can see how kids would do that, because that's how, or teenagers, that's how their mind works. Yes.
Is, if only I'd done this, or I should have done that way, because they don't have the life experience to know, look, it didn't matter, it was going to happen anyway. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And if I hadn't said that, what if I hadn't said that? Would it be different?
How do you think people can help kids to keep remembering somebody? Like when you were talking about the guy who you helped in TY that time, how do you think families can do it if their kids are in that position, or they know somebody?
It is delicate insofar as when my sisters were talking about my father, I wasn't ready to talk about him. I wasn't ready to remember him. I think what I learned from working with Angela and Justine and reading the literature and just being absorbed in it was that I think as adults we can allow all the emotions, the difficult emotions. So very often and I know I speak for myself here with a 5-year-old, is we want them to get back to being happy quickly because it's uncomfortable for us to feel their pain. Whereas it's, tell them about, you've got a bowl of water in your hands and it's got all those emotions. Just sit with it. It's okay. We don't need to throw it away. We can all sit with it, and helping them, and it's in the chapter, just understand how they feel and helping them. I didn't know how I felt. I didn't know the difference between sadness and anger and regret. And I think as adults, that's one thing we can do. I know that's different to what you asked. It's not necessarily helping us remember, but it's allowing us sit with the feelings of we have. And they could be different in a day. And for teenagers, you know, their frontal lobe isn't fully developed. They can't maybe rationalise. So it's helping them rather than, you know, fast-tracking them away from those emotions.
Because I think as adults, we tend to do that with kids. Like the whole, kids are very resilient and blah, blah, blah. And I think, you know, adults tend to give kids a certain amount of years almost, and then it's like, oh, well, you know, sort of 7 years ago. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yet, they may still have their parents, and when their parent may die, then it's suddenly like, you know, they're understandably upset.
Exactly.
And it's suddenly like, oh,
yeah,
you know.
And it's understanding that if a teenager comes in that day and they're angry and Granny's died 2 months ago, it might be a significant date. That might be a Thursday, and they always went to them on a Thursday. And it's just, it's tricky as parents. I know this. I am one. Yeah. Is just sit with your own bowl of emotion. You know, just sit with it and go, right, okay, what's going on, and just allow them come be where they are before you bring them anywhere else. And then obviously in the chapter, I think for parents, I was thinking about in the drive-in, I was thinking, if this wasn't my book or our book and I'd read it, I'd be giving it that chapter, I'd be photocopying that chapter for a parent the minute I know, just to have the awareness of how to deal with a teenager or a young child who've lost granny, and teaching them that loss is such a part of life, that loss isn't just death. Loss is when you lose something that you value, and that could be a friendship. Or, you know, I talk about a divorce. You know, there's a lot of things
or
that
pet
are just
or anything.
pet.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, because it's interesting how sort of as adults we don't often go into that space of a child's head and what they're. I remember when my dad died a couple of years ago, and my youngest would have been 10, and he came into me the evening my dad had died, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, Mum, I'll show you how it's done." And I was just,
Wow.
then I remember thinking
Your
to
son
myself,
said this.
yeah. And I remember thinking to myself, how weird it was that he'd been through it at that stage for 5 years. And although I had, but in a different way, that now this was all new to me, but he was sort of almost like an old hand at it, you know.
And did he in some ways?
Yeah. No, it was funny, but again with the grandparent thing, it was sort of like another close person, so it was sort of tricky in that way. But it's funny, you don't really give, I don't think, kids and teenagers the credit, you know.
And when we do, when we expect to be surprised or just expect to not know the answers, they can amaze us. So to answer your initial question, it's keeping them alive and it's in the book about a kid called Stu, about what is it about your grandparent or your friend that you loved? What do you want to keep alive that they represented, that they were? You know, if you close your eyes and you think of your granddad, what was he like? You know, he was jolly. So how can you keep joy alive? How will we keep joy alive in our family? To honour granddad. So he's always with us. We always have his arm around us. And I think that's the way. And obviously there's more tangible things you can do. But I think keeping their spirit alive, and I talk about it in the book, and throughout the book it's there. I think the word soul is mentioned like 30 times, is that they're always with us. Yeah. And that doesn't mean we're going to walk into the room and they're there and we're like, whoa! No, their energy is with us. The love they had for you is with us. And it's not forcing this on teenagers, but I think it's reminding them that they've still got our back.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
It's lovely.
And the book, the re-edition, is out in October.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.